we have plenty to discuss, and you kind of mentioned it, Dortmund. This is not going to be a tearful Dortmund episode, I think, Stefan. Was this the Germans have this beautiful word for this, Leistungsexplosion, explosion in performance. I think it really sums it up well what happened here. It felt like an evening where they met an opponent that I thought was totally disorganized, showing all the weaknesses of Stefan Baumgart football. So kind of like maybe a little bit of a perfect storm. They also had an evening in which Serhou Guirassy, which whatever he touched went into the goal. 4 goals for him, right? For another fantastic. He's playing a fantastic season. And it just kind of felt like all the negativity, the ballast, the angst that this Dortmund team had accumulated over the last 22 match days or so, all kind of fell off, shaken off. Again, it's an Union Berlin side that I felt like was completely there for the taking, but still, this match and this performance is fantastic news for Dortmund, and could, if they do this right, which we have to wait and see if they do, could really launch them to maybe salvaging the season after all.
Yeah, it felt like a huge performance for Dortmund. It felt like a game where everything just kind of clicked. It felt like a game in which they kind of got the rub of the green at times. I do somewhat think the score was a little flattering. I think people will probably see 6-0 and they'll think, wow, Dortmund were just outstanding from the start to the finish. And although I do think they were quite good, I think it probably took about 30 minutes for the game to kind of kick into gear. And that only really came about through a truly hilarious own goal where Ryerson obviously just fires a shot across goal, it hits off later, the defender, and kind of just balloons into the back of the net. And then the second goal comes about from Pascal Gross kind of picking up the ball deep inside the Union Berlin half, which was something that happened time and time again. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the second goal was Guirassy making an interception to the right of the Union box, and then I think the third one was something similar, where Pascal Gross picked up quite. In fact, I think he actually intercepted it in Union Berlin box when they're trying to dribble it out of their own net, out of their own box. So I think in many ways it was the perfect opponent for Dortmund to play at this moment in time. Union Berlin they were atrocious in this game, I thought, but atrocious in all the ideal ways for Dortmund, in the sense they haven't defended very well, and they kept making mistakes in their own half, which basically afforded Dortmund the ball like 20 yards from goal. And at times it really felt like Dortmund just had to basically just kind of thread the needle a little bit, although even thread the needle maybe sounds like too hard a task. They just had to score an open goal. There we go. Use a metaphor from the sport we're talking about. That's a better way to do it. And that's what they did. I think, just to kind of narrow in on Union Berlin for a moment, because I actually did look up these stats before we started recording today, just to kind of double check these performances, because they have been truly atrocious. And the thing that really stands out to me is that, and I'll just read out the post I put on Blue Sky and things like that this morning, which was prior to Stefan Baumgartner as their new head coach, Union Berlin had conceded a pretty respectable 19 goals in 15 games. In his first 8 games in charge, Union have conceded 16 goals. So they're conceding more goals per game under Baumgart, and their goals scored has fallen slightly from 0.93 to 0.87. So they're conceding more goals under Baumgart. They're not scoring as many goals under Baumgart. And I had a quick check to see what the league table was like since he's been in charge. Only 3 teams have got fewer points than Union Berlin. So I know they got that draw against RB Leipzig, and they beat Mainz, I think it was. So there was maybe some suggestions that he was turning things around, but I just think they looked like rabbits caught in the headlights for 90 minutes in this game. But to Dortmund's credit, they took advantage of that. I actually think even though I don't think we could put too much stock in beating this Union Berlin team right now, I actually thought Kovac's tactics were actually quite sharp. He brought Benzibaini back in, who obviously was very attacking, and obviously his kind of interception led to the second goal, if it wasn't a mistake. Adeyemi, I thought, had a really good game. Maximilian Bayer missed 2 or 3 golden opportunities, but bringing him in to replace Gittins, I thought was a brave move from Kovac and one that ultimately paid off.
Mhm.
But most interestingly of all, Julian Brandt was ruled out this game for an injury, and I thought it was quite fascinating that Dortmund looked much better without him. I thought this was the best game that Pascal Gross has played in a Dortmund team, or played in a Dortmund shirt since he moved to Germany, or moved back to Germany, I suppose. And, he just ran the show. I think he got 4 assists in this game, if I'm not mistaken, and he was constantly the guy on the edge of the box pulling those passes, to the point that Gio Reyna, who was technically in for Julian Brandt, didn't really do much at all in this game. And he kind of got substituted off in the second half without doing a huge amount for Chukwuemeka. But yeah, so I guess I don't want it to sound too negative because Dortmund fans will be rolling their eyes thinking, wow, a 6-0 win doesn't even please these guys. But I think beating Union Berlin only counts for so much. But I think the way that Kovac set up his team in this game was really impressive. He made some big calls and it worked out tremendously well. So all credit to him.
Yeah, I mean, I was asked about Gio Reyna. He gets a rare start as a number 10, which I think is his best position. He was industrious, but I don't want to take away from him his performance too much because he did work hard. It just didn't quite happen for him, right? In this match, and I think there is an opportunity there for him to maybe supplant Brandt. The other thing I would say is that when Carney came in for Gio Reyna, he had an excellent game as well in the few minutes that he was given, right? I think he was involved in the final goal. So, there's, I guess, 3 guys now that can play that number 10 role. And I just think that Julian Brandt is maybe too slow for it. The way that the number 10 role has kind of evolved into you can't just be the playmaker anymore. You also have to be able to carry the ball quickly through the transition zone. I mean, it's no mistake that someone like Mario Götze, for example, who was a classic number 10, now plays more as a number 8, right? Because he doesn't have the speed to play as a number 10. Just to give you an example, right? And I think that Carney is maybe faster. And I think Gio Reyna is maybe a little bit faster too. And so there is maybe an opportunity there for him there. It's, yeah, I think, looking this Dortmund performance overall, the one other thing that really stuck out to me was that XG 5.42 to 0.9. A lot of the things when I listen to you talk here, to maybe transition this a little bit to Union Berlin, a team that I think is really in trouble, and we have to wait and see what happens with that point deduction, right, from the Bochum game. That's still in court. I think it's a point for them if it gets ruled that way, and 2 extra points for Bochum. So that is something that really hangs over them as well as a club. But I also think that this Baumgart the appointment is an absolute disaster. And there's something that I want about when it happened, because I think that they had an incredible coach in Bo Svensson, who I think, given the time, would have done something similar than what Bo Henriksen is currently doing with Mainz. I think that Mainz actually never really wanted to get rid of Bo Svensson in the first place. He's an excellent coach. He's a coach who, with some time, can really bring a vision to a club. And they went with the populist move and hired a guy who couldn't get it done in Hamburg with the best team in that league, right? Hamburg SV have the best team in the second division, and it's not even close. And you just see the interim coach currently at HSV is guiding them back to the Bundesliga. And it was an absolute disaster with him, with Baumgart in charge. And I don't understand why you look at that situation at HSV, Baumgart gets fired, and then there's a club like, oh yeah, he played like for us back in the day. He's a proper East German. Let's hire him. Like, he fits our culture. It's like that's the sort of decision making that gets clubs into trouble, and gets clubs relegated. To be quite frank with you, and it's also the sort of decision making that Union Berlin didn't do when they were successful. And I just, I look at this appointment and I look at the mistakes that they're making. I look at the defensive weaknesses. These things were all apparent for Baumgart football before he was hired. So, I think this is one of those things where you look at it, where you think, what was Horst Held thinking in hiring that guy?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really kind of tricky one for Union Berlin. We've talked about it before. I actually wrote a newsletter when he was appointed, kind of raising an eyebrow and mild intrigue as to why they made that call for that decision. You could maybe make an argument for some performances and some results so far suggest that he is kind of at least getting points against the team he's supposed to. He obviously beat Mainz, he beat Hoffenheim, got a draw against RB Leipzig, but that 3-0 defeat to St. Pauli, a 2-0 defeat to Heidenheim, losing at home to Gladbach, although Gladbach have been better recently, losing to Augsburg, who also have been better since the turn of the year. I don't know. I think we might be in a really tricky position for Union Berlin, and there's really big storm clouds on the horizon for them, I think, because look, a result against Dortmund at the Westfalenstadion was never going to be the kind of games that he was hired to win, so we can't really judge too much on that performance. But if you actually look at their form or their fixtures coming up, it's really worrying for Union Berlin. They've got Holstein Kiel at home. Now, that is a crucial must-win for Union Berlin. There's just no two ways about it, because let me rhyme off who they've got to play after that. They then go to Eintracht Frankfurt. They then welcome Bayern Munich at home. They then go to Freiburg. They then play Wolfsburg at home. They then go away to Bayer Leverkusen. Then they play Stuttgart at home. Then, in their last 4 games of the season, they've got Bochum, Werder Bremen, Heidenheim, and Augsburg. So 4, or at least 3 winnable games. But before that, they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 matches which they could feasibly lose. That's 18 points. And that's 18 points the teams around them can pick up here and there. So if he doesn't beat Holstein Kiel, I really don't know where Union Berlin and Baumgart are going to go from there, because not to say that they can't win games against these teams. Wolfsburg are incredibly inconsistent this season. Maybe Freiburg kind of trip up. Stuttgart have dropped points this season. But those are 6 games that they'll be huge underdogs for. And by the time they get out of that run and they come up against Bochum, Bremen, Heidenheim, and Augsburg, they could be dead last at the Bundesliga table. Absolutely dead last. Like I said, since the turn of the year, there's only 3 clubs. I think it's Heidenheim, Bochum, and Kiel who've picked up fewer points than Union Berlin, but they've only picked up 2 fewer points on them. So, I know they're 9 points technically off the relegation zone, but a lot can change in that time. Bochum have only lost 2 of the last 5 games. Heidenheim could have beaten RB Leipzig this weekend, and they might take an uptick in form now that they're out of Europe. I'm obviously not expecting Kiel to pick up 18 points by any means, but St. Pauli, Hoffenheim, these teams around Union Berlin are picking up points. And for Union to now go potentially 6 games where they could feasibly lose every one is a huge concern, because you look at Stefan Baumgart's record today, and it just isn't very inspiring at all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, as you were rattling off the matches that they have coming up, it's that Holstein Kiel. There is a world where that Holstein Kiel game is the only game where they pick up 3 points, and that is not crazy talk. That is a world that can feasibly exist. The gap then shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, and before you know it, you're in panic mode. And then clubs make even dumber decisions, because that's what they usually do when they get into panic mode. And it just seems like they got themselves into this kind of decision without need in the first place, right? They didn't have to get into the situation in the first place. So, yeah, it's extremely disappointing. Great match day for Borussia Dortmund. You look at the table now; they're on 32 points. That gap is to 7 points now to the top 4, because almost everyone in front of them, of the top teams, has dropped points, right? You now have Freiburg and Mainz sitting there in 4th and 5th. Is there a world still where we think that Borussia Dortmund can do this and somehow sneak into the top 4 still?
I mean, only a club like Dortmund could do exactly that, while somehow stumbling to a Champions League final or something like that.
The draw is not bad for them in the UCL, I have to say.
I joked about it on Blue Sky and Threads last week, that you could easily see them, stumbling past Lille and then beating Leverkusen, who beat Bayern, and blah, 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 through a Niklas Süle, goal that hit off his backside or something. Yeah, I mean, look, they're only, now 7 points off the top 4, miraculously. Yeah. And it's all absolutely to play for Borussia Dortmund. I don't actually have their fixture list in front of me, but now's as good a time as any to kind of plug my newsletter for this week, which is on Dortmund, and it is kind of looking at the underlying stats and Niko Kovac's first 5 games in charge and whether he is making doing a lot of work in the background. And it's not so much based on the Union Berlin game, and as I said at the top of the show, I'm not putting a huge amount of stock in that, but if you took a look at the underlying stats for Dortmund, there's a lot to be optimistic about. And yeah, now that I have the fixtures in front of me, they're away to St. Pauli, they got Augsburg at home, then they play RB Leipzig, Mainz, Freiburg, and then they've got Bayern Munich on April. So there's plenty of winnable games there, by all means. Some very tough games. Augsburg, Mainz, Freiburg, they're 3 of the probably most improved teams this season. St. Pauli haven't been terrible, although they haven't obviously won a few games recently, but they've not been great, and we'll come on to talk about RB Leipzig in some time. But it's absolutely all there to play for, and there's a lot to be encouraged by in that Union Berlin performance. And as hopefully subscribers will be able to tell from my newsletter this week, there's even more possibly to succeed for Dortmund on the horizon.
Yeah, I mean, what favors them is that they also still play that direct competition, right, for that Champions League spot. So we'll have to wait to see how that plays out. All right.